want to go to hell? Huh? Huh, Pink?
Chuck Watch.
You want to go to hell with me?
Who is Chuck Dixon? Chuck Dixon is an American comics writer who, for a good chunk of the 90s, wrote the lion's share of DC Comics Batman titles, including Detective Comics, Robin, Nightwing, Catwoman, and Birds of Prey. He and penciler Graham Nolan developed the character of Bane, the man who, in comics and movies, would break the bat. He began his career, as was traditional for comics creators from the 50s up to the 80s, in a fanzine. His was called, well, it wasn't his, but the one he participated in was called Gasm. And from there, he worked with a now defunct comics publisher, Comico. Eventually, after cold calling and cajoling Larry Hama, the editor of Marvel's Conan properties, he managed in 1985 to land a gig writing Cull backup stories before being handed Savage Sword of Conan. In addition, he wrote a sizable chunk of a book called Alien Legion, and later went on to write Moon Knight for Marvel. During all of this, he also wrote something called Airboy for Eclipse Comics. And then, in 1990, he landed a gig writing Punisher, enjoying a long run on Punisher War Journal. Batman editor Denny O'Neil, reading Airboy, encouraged Dixon to write a Robin miniseries starring the newly introduced Tim Drake character. It sold very well. This led to further miniseries, and to Dixon taking the helm of Detective Comics in 1992. Now, without getting further into the weeds, we'll just say that at this point, Denny O'Neil, seeing that he had a reliable employee who could produce serviceable, sometimes even exciting work at an industrial pace, tapped Dixon to write dozens upon dozens of comics. So what is Chuck Watch? Chuck Watch is about revisiting the Chuck Dixon comics that we enjoyed in our youth and submitting them to a little more scrutiny than our teenaged minds could manage, in an effort to see what sort of unconscious messages we were receiving. Now, we've already played this game twice in episodes 1 and 3 of the X-tinction Agenda, when we looked at Detective Comics 700 and the first Team 7 miniseries. Looking closely at those books revealed a couple things that ought to have given pause. Now, Dixon's fall from grace began after Denny O'Neil retired and Bob Schreck took over as Bat editor. Schreck, one gets the impression, had less of the pulp dime novel sensibility that had dominated the Bat books for the past decade. He was looking for something new. He was the one, for instance, who brought in Grant Morrison to write the regular Batman title. Now, this would not have been so bad for Dixon. After all, he was still getting work at both DC and Marvel. But in 2003, Dixon made the boneheaded mistake of speaking out against depictions of homosexuality in superhero comics, insinuating even a nefarious agenda on the part of a certain editor over at Marvel. He was asked to apologize. He refused. And then shortly thereafter, the work at Marvel and DC began to dry up, far more than it already had been. Now, this was during a time when Dixon was entering into a new phase of his career, writing genre stories for the failed startup CrossGen, and then later, up until today, working for other publishers such as IDW and Bongo, writing Simpsons of all things, occasionally, as well as self-publishing. Now, Dixon is kept very busy despite the fact that he is not likely to ever return to writing for the major two publishers. His last work with DC, if I remember correctly, was Conquest of Bane. That was like 2008. And there hasn't been anything since then. Doesn't mean there won't be, but it seems right now that Chuck Dixon is not likely to get a major title. In the era of Me Too, and with the push for diversity in superhero comics publishing, Dixon's self-admitted right of Genghis Khan conservatism is unwelcome. Dixon, in response to what he calls blacklisting, retorts that he has always left his own politics out of his writing, citing, for instance, the fact that although he was a paid-up member of the NRA, he often put anti-gun messaging into Batman's dialogues. Unlike modern comics publishers, Dixon argues, he never forced his own politics onto comics readers. It is, to his mind, the, quote, opponents of free speech, end quote, and the, quote, radical core of far-left editors and publishers forcing ideologies on the creator community, as well as the readership, end quote, who ought to be removed from comics. They are destroying the business, not him. He focuses on craft and puts asses in the seats. So it is in this context that we must look at a book such as Alt Hero Q #2, published in October of 2019 by Arkhaven Comics, and more specifically by a fellow named Theodore Beale, a prominent American white nationalist agitator. Going by the name of Vox Dei, spelled D-A-Y, it's a play on the Latin for voice of God, Vox Dei. He publishes books that vilify so-called social justice warriors, and frequents white nationalist conspiracy media outlets such as The Alex Jones Show. Now, Dixon, in a 2018 interview, claims not to know much about Bale, despite numerous confrontations about his involvement with the project. He speaks enthusiastically about the project. If Dixon is attempting to keep his politics out of the way of his work, then he's doing it in a very strange way. So strange, in fact, that one is led to the conclusion that he isn't trying to keep his politics away. In the age of Twitter and the growing ideological polarization of American culture, he has, at the same time that he bemoans the constant media infighting, become a prominent conservative troll. Now, Alt Hero Q is little more than an attempt to, as they would say, trigger the libs, masked as an action-adventure story. In issue 2, the only issue of the series that I've read, probably, unless someone were to steal it on my behalf, the only issue of the series that I'm ever going to read, because I don't want to give money to white nationalists, and stop. I gave money to white nationalists in order to review this comic for this monologue, because I want to say at least that I read it. Anyway, it's about, the main character's name is Roland Dane, an agent of the U.S. Treasury who is on the run. As the book opens, he's being shot at and hunted by his own government for reasons that he does not yet understand. But luckily, he is not alone. Throughout the story, he is assisted by Q, a heroized version of QAnon, the Nostradamus-like messenger on 4chan who popped up in October of 2017 claiming to be an insider of the deep state, revealing a plot to take down President Racist Grandpa. Now, Q sends Dane text messages, guiding his actions, and also sends agents, regular everyday people, who have volunteered and are working together to defeat the evil forces threatening their nation. It is notable that each volunteer is white, and like the heroization of Q, Alt Hero Q takes a staple of white nationalist paranoid ideology, the fetishization of the lone wolf, and what academics refer to as stochastic terrorism, and paints it in a heroic light. Indeed, Alt Hero goes out of its way to dramatize far-right talking points. Much of the conspiracy described throughout the book is cribbed from places like Alex Jones. The government, through mass facial recognition technology, knows your every move. Agents within the government and media, including major Hollywood celebrities, use child pornography to blackmail corrupt politicians into doing their bidding. The enemy is omniscient and omnipresent. Only a silent counter-conspiracy and the help of an insider have any hope of overcoming it. There is a moment in this story when Dixon, without at all needing to, has Dane encounter an elderly couple at a hotel breakfast bar. He's taken the last 2 donuts. Dane has. The elderly couple, the woman, wears a Me Too shirt, complains that they have left nothing for them. Dane, that he has left nothing for them. Dane, as if to introduce the hard realities of life on Earth, replies, "And if you'd got here first, then there'd be none for me." See how that works? Dixon, through Dane, is overtly expressing a sort of rugged survivalist individualism. It's presenting life as nasty, brutish, and short, as if to say, get used to it, snowflake. The old man, impotent, threatens to speak to management about him, while the old woman scowls. The entire exchange is puerile. The purpose of Chuck Watch, one of the semi-regular features of the Extinction Agenda will be to locate traces of current-day far-right conservative troll Chuck Dixon in the Chuck Dixon of the 80s and 90s and aughts, when his writing was at the very center of Marvel and DC's major franchises. Dixon may claim that he left his politics at the door when he sat down at the typewriter, but one suspects that the man who would write Alt-Hero Q without shame, and he really ought to be ashamed, is a man who believes in this stuff, and perhaps always did. Thoughts and beliefs leak. Often, in the case of writers, they leak onto the page. Chuck Watch is about seeing what leaks out of the hack writing of Chuck Dixon. Okay, so that's all about that for now. We're going to be back on Wednesday with episodes 8 and 9 of the Extinction Agenda, as episode 8 enters into the future, which is the present, and episode 9 is just a regular old episode. See you then.
Now, all we need is a little energon and a lot of luck.